this the whole Strait of Hormuz crisis is analogous to the Suez Canal moment for the U.S. empire. So Suez Canal crisis was when the British and French, they still try to assert themselves as an old colonial power, and they try to resist Egypt's attempt to nationalize the Suez Canal, and they sent their troops. And that's when the other powers stepped in, the Soviet Union and United States said, don't do that. And it turns out they couldn't, because post-war France and Britain actually depended on aid from United States to keep their economy going, to keep their military going. So once U.S. cut of aid, they have to recall back their troops. And that really showed that they were truly paper tigers, and that marks kind of the fall of both the British and the French colonial empires. Now, in case United States, that moment is now.
大家好，这里是华人看世界 CNView 频道。今天是2026年8月17日，德克萨斯州傍晚近7点。近日，美国政坛传出重磅消息，特朗普总统已决议大幅缩减美军在联合军事演习中的参与规模。这究竟是单纯的政治博弈，还是美军在全球战略收缩下的无奈之举？特朗普在社交媒体上将此举解释为与朝鲜领导人的深厚友谊，但当我们将目光投向帖文背后的深意，会发现这更像是一场针对韩国拒绝配合其对伊战略的报复。与此同时，美国在亚太地区的军事部署正出现前所未有的动摇，随着美军航母调往中东。东亚局势面临新的变数，当美国试图通过2级制裁让全球为它的战争买单时，世界各国是否还会选择盲从？本期节目，我们特邀地缘政治分析师、丝绸与钢铁播客主持人卡尔查共同深度拆解这场美韩关系的裂痕，探讨美国霸权在资源捉襟见肘时的真实困境。从霍尔木兹海峡的危机到中国能源战略的前瞻性布局，我们将带您看清这个多极化时代下大国博弈的底层逻辑。美国帝国体系是否正在瓦解？面对美国不断挑起的区域冲突，中国又将如何以静制动？精彩深度分析马上开始。
It is August 17th, 2026, and it's just before 7 p.m. local time here in Texas, as Trump has decided that he is going to punish South Korea by drastically reducing the U.S. involvement in joint military exercises. Now, why is he doing this? Because if you read Trump's post on Truth Social, you may think that it really is because he's such good friends with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un that he doesn't want to send the wrong message. But then you get to the bottom of the post, the part where he mentions that South Korea told him no, that they didn't get involved with his war on Iran. And then we see, as we usually do, what is going to become Trump's attempted revenge as he tries to go after all of the countries that didn't help him out with his illegal war of aggression against Iran, but that also aren't listening when the U.S. tells them not to trade with Iran or Russia. We're seeing a lot of talk about secondary sanctions and about attempts by the U.S. to make everyone suffer. But what is the U.S. going to do when the rest of the world moves on without them? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Carl Za, a geopolitical analyst and host of the Silk and Steel podcast. Carl, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Hey, Rachel, thank you for inviting.
Yeah, I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you again. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here because I know that Trump is continuing both the war against Iran and this pivot away from Asia. He announced in a post on Truth Social that the U.S. will substantially reduce joint military exercises with South Korea. Now, in this post, he says that the exercises are costly, that they send the wrong message to North Korea, with whom he has a very good relationship, and he's not happy with the fact that South Korea refused to join him in the denuclearization of Iran, as he called it. What do you make of Trump's messaging here? And does this show just how desperate the U.S. military is, given its increasing lack of resources?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with North Korea. This has everything to do with punishing South Korea for refusing to join in on his little war against Iran. And you're right, they're desperate. I mean, if United States Navy cannot open the Strait of Hormuz, what's a couple of ships from Europe or Korea would do? I mean, South Korea understands this, and South Korea also, like many East Asian countries, depend on their energy supply coming from Persian Gulf, which, by the way, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the war. Trump's little war is creating tremendous amount of economic hardship for the countries of Asia, and South Korea just don't see this as their war. It's not. Trump being Trump, he's just been pity. He thought, okay, this is my opportunity to get back at South Korea by refusing to do this joint exercise. But you know what? Ironically, this actually puts damage on the U.S. imperial system because the U.S. empire depends on these like joint exercises with its so-called partners by really vassal states to continue to operate. In fact, in terms of U.S.-Korea relationship is concerned, it's specified during a time of war, United States will assume the joint command of the U.S. and Korean military army. So Korean military would be answerable to a U.S. general if a hostility were to break out between, say, North Korea. This is why the Pentagon has insisted these exercises are very important. You make sure the two sides maintain the interoperability where, all the equipments will work together, their units will work together. But Trump is being a petulant child about this. So ironically, he's the one that's dismantling the U.S. empire at the moment.
Yeah, it's crazy to watch, and exactly as you said there, for him to come out and be like, oh, well, I'm just such good friends with Kim Jong-un that I don't want to send the wrong message. And I'm like, send the wrong message? Like, as if Trump, which he probably hasn't read a history book a day in his life, he needs a bit of a refresher there. But the U.S. is not exactly friends with North Korea, no matter what Trump may want to say or think about it. And I did think it was interesting, speaking of the U.S. taking its eye off of Asia, the U.S. military just pulled its last aircraft carrier out of the region as we have the USS George Washington being sent from the Pacific to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Middle East. And the Lincoln has been at sea for over 250 days. There have been increasing reports of major issues that include a lack of food, broken down plumbing on board, and multiple sailors jumping off the ship. I know that this is symbolic, but it's also a very real picture of the current stage of the dying U.S. empire. How do you see the latest updates, and what do they tell us about the reality of the U.S. military and the position it's in?
This shows a serious resource constraint faced the U.S. empire trying to be a global hegemon, to be at all places at all time. The Iran war showed that it's impossible. United States, in fact, the whole pivot to Asia that was piloted under Obama administration, under then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, right now is a complete fiasco. In fact, when they say pivot to Asia, they're really talking about pivot to East Asia. They weren't talking about pivot to West Asia, but that's what's happening right now because Israel has done a lot to drag United States into the Middle East quagmire, and U.S. military, they just, even though supposedly it has 11 aircraft carrier attack group on paper, but really it could only deploy about 4 at any given time. And this is why now they have to take the resources from East Asia to deploy to Iran. They already did that with the THAAD missiles, the missile defense system they had in South Korea, and now they're sending their aircraft carrier. The whole Strait of Hormuz crisis is analogous to the Suez Canal moment for the U.S. empire. So Suez Canal crisis was when the British and French, they still try to assert themselves as an old colonial power, and they try to resist Egypt's attempt to nationalize the Suez Canal, and they sent their troops. And that's when the other powers stepped in. The Soviet Union and United States said, "Don't do that." And it turns out they couldn't because post-war France and Britain actually depended on aid from United States to keep their economy going, to keep their military going. So once U.S. cut of aid, they have to recall back their troops, and that really showed that they were truly paper tigers, and that marks kind of the fall of both the British and the French colonial empires. Now, in case United States, that moment is now. The Strait of Hormuz has really shown the U.S. itself is a paper tiger, and this will calls into the question of the logic of U.S. imperial system. A lot of the so-called U.S. ally, they joined the U.S. hosting U.S. bases on their soil with the expectation that U.S. to provide a security umbrella. But it turns out hosting U.S. bases is not an asset, it's a liability. It makes you a target, as all the Gulf countries are finding out right now. And now all the East Asian countries are realizing they're not even top priority for the United States. You know, they can't compete with the golden boy Israel. And they will have to come up, you know, I'm sure that they're not saying that publicly, but I'm sure in the behind the closed rooms, now they're trying to come together with an alternative to the US-led security system, because they can no longer count on the United States.
Yeah, I guess all of these Southeast Asian countries are learning the hard way the lesson that Ukraine had to learn, which is that Israel comes first, and if Israel wants a war against Iran and the US gets into it, well, now we've got to send all of our resources there. And it has been interesting to kind of see the dance that the hawks in Washington are doing, and they're arguing that, well, if the US takes its eye off of China, then Beijing is going to target Taiwan or South Korea or Japan, because the US still dreams of trying to contain China. And like you were saying, it's not as if, you know, looking at the assets that the US has taken out of the region, those aren't going to be enough to stop China if Beijing wanted some sort of all-out conflict, which of course it doesn't. But when you look at China, are you watching for any movement on their end, or are they still trying to kind of patiently wait and look for opportunities to work with the countries in the region, their neighbors, that are finding out the hard way just how much the US cares about them?
各位观众，通过刚才的深度对话，我们不难发现，当前国际局势正处于一个极其微妙且危险的转折点。从特朗普政府对韩国采取的惩罚性政策，到美军在全球范围内捉襟见肘的战略收缩，这一切表象背后，其实揭示了一个更为本质的问题。美国试图维持全球霸权的旧体系，正在经历一场前所未有的信任危机与资源枯竭。当所谓的盟友体系逐渐演变成美国随意操弄的附庸工具，当美军不仅无法提供安全保障，反而因为频繁的挑衅行为让驻地国沦为活靶子时，世界各国的决策者们已经开始清醒地认识到，依赖美国霸权不仅不安全，甚至可能是一场灾难。正如地缘政治分析师卡尔查所言，我们正在目睹一个帝国如何通过自绝于国际社会的方式亲手终结自己的霸权时代。美国曾是国际规则的制定者，如今却为了维护自身利益，不断践踏自己亲手建立的国际法律框架。这种行为不仅让美国逐渐沦为国际秩序中的流氓国家，更让全球南方国家乃至传统盟友开始加速寻找替代方案。无论是金砖国家在金融系统上的独立尝试，还是各国在能源供应上对单一路径的去风险化，都标志着全球力量平衡正在发生历史性的东移。中国在应对外部封锁时所展现出的战略定力与未雨绸缪，显然已经走在了美国那些只顾眼前利益的决策者前面。当美国依然沉浸在冷战思维，企图通过制造动荡来阻碍他国发展时，中国早已通过持续的经济深耕、能源储备以及技术自主，在风浪中稳坐钓鱼台。这种对比不仅仅是策略上的胜负，更是两种文明发展理念的终极较量。我们必须看清，所谓的基于规则的国际秩序，如果失去了国际法的支撑，终究只是强权政治的遮羞布。世界各国已经看透了这一点，并开始用脚投票。 逐步构建一个不再被美国霸权所绑架的多极化未来。我们正处在历史的分水岭，观察这些变动，不仅是为了看清地缘政治的博弈，更是为了理解未来世界运行的新逻辑。在这个过程中，保持清醒、独立思考，比以往任何时候都更加重要。如果您喜欢本期视频，对国际局势的深度复盘，觉得这些观点为您分析时事提供了新的视角，请别忘了在视频下方点赞并订阅我们的频道，开启小铃铛，这样您就不会错过后续更多深度的国际视评论。感谢您的收看，我们下期节目再见。